The hall sparkled with golden lights, and the sound of music filled every corner. It was the grand 60th birthday celebration of Mr. Richard Cole, one of the richest businessmen in the city. Expensive cars lined up outside the hotel, and guests dressed in shiny gowns and suits arrived one after another. Everyone wanted to meet the billionaire, shake his hand, and take a picture with him. The air was full of laughter, clinking glasses, and cheerful voices. Cameras flashed every few seconds as waiters moved around, serving trays full of sparkling drinks and delicious food. Everything looked perfect, glamorous, and loud, except for one quiet corner. Sitting there was Mrs. Eleanor Cole, Richard's elderly mother. She was dressed beautifully in a soft silver gown, her white hair pinned neatly, and a pearl necklace shining around her neck. Though she looked graceful and calm, there was a deep sadness in her eyes. She had been deaf since birth, and even though she could read lips a little, it wasn't easy for her to follow what people were saying in a crowded, noisy room. The laughter and chatter around her meant nothing. It was just silence to her. People noticed her, of course, but no one really tried to speak to her. Some were nervous, unsure how to communicate with someone who couldn't hear. Others thought it would be awkward, so they just smiled politely from a distance and turned away. Even her son, Richard, was too busy talking to business partners, posing for photos and greeting politicians. He looked proud and confident, surrounded by people praising him for his success. But behind that proud smile, he didn't notice that his mother was sitting all alone, her hands folded neatly in her lap, watching everyone quietly. At one point, a group of women sitting nearby began whispering. One of them said softly, "That's his mother, right? Poor lady, she can't hear a word." Another replied, "Yes, I heard she's been deaf her whole life. Such a shame." They said it with pity, not realizing that Mrs. Cole could read their lips. She caught a few words and looked away, pretending not to understand. Her heart ached, but she was used to moments like these, being seen but not really heard. As the night went on, speeches began. People stood on stage, talking about Richard's business journey, his success, his donations, and his luxurious lifestyle. Everyone clapped loudly after every speech, but Mrs. Cole could only tell they were clapping by seeing their moving hands and smiling faces. She smiled too, not because she heard the words, but because she wanted to appear happy for her son. Deep down, she wished someone would just come over and talk to her. Not through sound, but with kindness. In the crowd, waiters rushed back and forth, carrying trays full of drinks and snacks. The rich guests didn't even notice them. To most people there, the staff were invisible. Among those workers was a humble maid named Maria. She had been working in Richard's mansion for many years. She respected Mrs. Cole deeply and often greeted her kindly whenever they crossed paths, even if she couldn't say much. That night, Maria was helping with the arrangements, making sure everything ran smoothly. Beside her was her daughter, Lila, an 18-year-old girl who had come to help her mother for extra pay. It was her first time at such a grand event. Her eyes widened at the glittering chandeliers, the tall guests, and the elegant dresses. She had never seen so much luxury in one place. But as she moved around serving food, she noticed something others didn't. The old woman sitting alone in the corner. While everyone else laughed and talked, Mrs. Cole just sat silently, looking lost in thought. Lila's heart softened. She didn't know who the woman was, but she could feel her loneliness even from across the room. There was something in her expression, something that said she wanted to be a part of the celebration but didn't know how. Lila kept glancing at her as she worked, feeling an invisible pull toward her. Mrs. Cole watched everyone dancing, clapping, and singing along to the music she couldn't hear. She could only see moving mouths, tapping feet, and smiling faces. It made her feel even more distant, like she was trapped behind a glass wall. She sighed softly and looked down at her hands, remembering the days when her late husband used to sign to her lovingly. Now no one around her knew her language. As the lights dimmed for the next performance, Lila passed by Mrs. Cole's table with a tray of desserts. For a brief moment their eyes met. It wasn't just a glance. It felt like two worlds colliding silently. Mrs. Cole gave her a gentle, tired smile, one that said, "Thank you for noticing me." Lila paused for a second, unsure what to do, then smiled back warmly before walking away. She didn't know it yet, but that tiny moment of kindness would change both their lives forever. While everyone else was focused on the glitter and glamour of the night, something much more meaningful was quietly about to begin. A connection not made with words or wealth, but with understanding and compassion. The night grew busier as the celebration continued. Waiters moved quickly through the crowd, balancing trays of drinks and plates of desserts, while guests laughed loudly, clinking their glasses together. The music played cheerfully, but in one corner, far away from the spotlight, the quiet world of Mrs. Eleanor Cole remained unchanged. She still sat alone, smiling politely whenever someone passed by, but no one stayed to talk. The party was big, but her heart felt small and empty. In another part of the hall, Maria was working tirelessly. She was one of the senior maids at the Cole mansion and was trusted to help with big family events like this. Her hands were tired, and her feet ached from hours of work, but she didn't complain. She was grateful to have a job that helped her provide for her daughter, Lila. Tonight, Maria had brought Lila along to assist her. The event organizer had agreed because extra help was needed, and Lila was responsible and hardworking. For Lila, this night felt like a dream. She had never been inside such a luxurious hall before. Everything around her looked like something out of a movie. The tall crystal chandeliers, the elegant flowers, the music, and the guests dressed like royalty. She followed her mother's instructions carefully, walking from one table to another, offering drinks and desserts, always with a polite smile. But unlike the rich guests, Lila wasn't distracted by the sparkle of the evening. She noticed the small things, the tired waiter who nearly dropped a tray, the nervous young singer waiting for her turn to perform, and most of all, the lonely old woman sitting quietly at the corner table. Each time Lila passed that table, she saw the same gentle lady sitting with perfect posture, her eyes watching the crowd, yet her smile never quite reaching her eyes. She didn't talk to anyone. She didn't even seem to be listening to the music. It almost looked like she was in a different world. Lila's curiosity grew stronger. At one point, she whispered to her mother, "Mama, who is that lady sitting alone?" Maria glanced over quickly and replied in a low voice, "That's Mrs. Eleanor Cole, Mr. Richard's mother. She's deaf, sweetheart. She can't hear anything that's happening." Lila's heart softened immediately. "She's deaf?" she repeated quietly. "Then no one is talking to her?" Maria sighed. "People usually don't know how. They don't mean to ignore her, but they don't know her language. So, she just sits quietly during events like this." Lila nodded slowly, feeling a strange sadness inside her. She thought about her father, who had passed away years ago. He had been a kind man and a sign language teacher at a small school for children with hearing disabilities. As a little girl, Lila had loved sitting beside him while he taught. He would playfully show her how to sign simple words like thank you, hello, and love. Even after his death, those memories stayed with her. Now, watching Mrs. Cole sitting alone, those memories came rushing back. She wanted to do something simple but meaningful. Her mother was busy, and the guests were too proud or too distracted to notice the old woman's loneliness. But Lila couldn't ignore her. As she moved closer to Mrs. Cole's table again, she slowed down. The old woman looked up and their eyes met. There was a brief moment of silence between them, but it felt warm and kind. Lila gave her a small smile, the kind that came from the heart. Mrs. Cole hesitated, then smiled back gently. That tiny exchange gave Lila courage. She placed her tray on a nearby table and took a deep breath. Then, very softly and naturally, she began to move her hands. She signed a simple greeting. "Hello? How are you?" For a second, Mrs. Cole froze. Her eyes widened in surprise. She had not expected anyone in that room to know sign language, especially not a young maid's daughter. Slowly, her expression changed from confusion to joy. She lifted her hands and signed back. "You know sign language?" Lila nodded happily and signed. "A little. My father taught me when I was small." And just like that, A wall that had stood between Mrs. Cole and the rest of the world began to fall. The two started signing slowly, their hands moving gracefully under the golden light of the hall. Mrs. Cole's face brightened, her eyes glowing with excitement. Lila laughed softly, feeling the warmth of connection flow between them. For the first time that night, Mrs. Cole wasn't alone. She didn't have to pretend to understand or smile quietly. She could talk, really talk. And Lila listened with her hands, her eyes, and her heart. Around them, no one noticed. The party continued, the music played, and people danced, unaware that something far more beautiful was happening in the corner. It wasn't just a conversation. It was a miracle of understanding. One girl giving back the gift of communication to a woman who had been left in silence for too long. Lila didn't know that this simple act would soon change her life forever. But at that moment, she didn't care about anything else. She only cared that the lonely lady was smiling again, and that smile felt more precious than all the diamonds in the room. The moment Lila signed those first few words, something magical happened. Mrs. Cole's tired eyes suddenly came alive, filled with surprise and joy. For years, she had attended her son's grand events in silence, always smiling, always polite, but always alone. People looked at her, but no one really saw her. Yet now, in this noisy hall full of strangers, a young maid's daughter had reached out to her, not with words but with understanding. Mrs. Cole's lips curved into a smile that felt real for the first time that evening. Her hands trembled slightly as she signed back to Lila. "You can understand me?" Lila nodded excitedly and signed. "Yes, I learned sign language from my father. He was a teacher." Mrs. Cole's smile grew wider. Her eyes softened with warmth, and for a moment, she forgot she was surrounded by hundreds of guests. It felt like the world had faded, leaving only her and this kind young girl who could finally hear her silence. Lila slowly crouched beside Mrs. Cole's table, setting her tray aside. She didn't want to disturb or embarrass her, but she felt drawn to her kindness. The conversation began gently. Mrs. Cole signed, "You're helping with the party?" Lila nodded and replied, "Yes, I came to help my mother. She works in your house." Mrs. Cole's eyes sparkled with recognition. "Maria's daughter?" She signed with excitement. Lila smiled and nodded again. Mrs. Cole touched her chest in surprise and signed, "She always greets me kindly. I like her. She's respectful." Lila blushed a little, touched by her words. For the first time in years, Mrs. Cole felt truly comfortable talking. Her hands moved gracefully, her expressions animated, and her heart light. She told Lila small things. How she loved flowers, how she missed her late husband, and how proud she was of her son, Richard, though she rarely got to talk to him anymore. Lila listened carefully, replying with warmth and sincerity. Other people in the hall didn't understand what was happening. They saw the maid's daughter sitting beside the billionaire's mother and assumed she was being too bold. Some guests whispered, wondering if the girl was bothering her. But Mrs. Cole didn't care what they thought. For her, it was the happiest she had felt in a very long time. As they continued signing, Mrs. Cole laughed softly. A soundless laugh, but full of life. Her eyes sparkled like a young girl's. Lila found herself laughing too. She felt honored that someone as graceful and kind as Mrs. Cole wanted to talk to her. At one point, Mrs. Cole reached across the table and gently held Lila's hand. Her touch was warm and gentle. She signed, "You are very kind. You remind me of my granddaughter who passed away young. She used to learn sign language for me, too." The words touched Lila's heart deeply. She smiled and signed back, "I'm sure she loved you very much." Mrs. Cole nodded slowly, her eyes misty. There was a pause between them, a soft silence filled with emotion and understanding. They didn't need to speak. They could feel each other's kindness. After a few minutes, Mrs. Cole signed something unexpected. "Would you like to sit with me for a while?" Lila hesitated, looking around nervously. "I'm working," she whispered softly. Mrs. Cole smiled knowingly and signed, "Just for a few minutes. You are doing more for me than anyone else tonight." That one sentence touched Lila's heart. She nodded, sat beside her for a moment, and the two continued their gentle conversation. Lila told her about her father, about learning sign language at home, and about her dream of studying communication sciences to help people like Mrs. Cole. The old woman's eyes filled with admiration. She signed, "You have a beautiful heart, my dear." Their hands moved faster now, their conversation full of laughter and curiosity. Mrs. Cole even shared how sometimes she pretended to understand people's words, just so they wouldn't feel uncomfortable. Lila smiled sadly and signed, "That must be very hard." Mrs. Cole replied, "It is. But tonight it feels easy. You make me feel heard." Meanwhile, a few guests began to notice the change. The billionaire's mother, who usually sat silently at parties, was now smiling, laughing, and moving her hands with energy. Even the staff working nearby stopped for a second to watch the beautiful exchange. Some whispered in awe, others smiled quietly, touched by the rare sight of true human connection in a room full of pride and wealth. But Lila didn't notice the attention. She was too busy listening and signing, her face glowing with happiness. Mrs. Cole felt free, as if someone had opened a window in her silent world and let the sunshine in. As their conversation came to a gentle pause, Mrs. Cole reached out again, patting Lila's hand affectionately. She signed slowly, "Thank you, my dear. You don't know how much this means to me." Lila's eyes softened as she replied, "You don't have to thank me. Talking to you is an honor." For a long moment, the two just smiled at each other. Two souls from completely different worlds, connected by kindness and hands that spoke louder than words. All around them, the party carried on. But for Mrs. Cole and Lila, time seemed to stop. What began as a simple act of compassion was quietly turning into something extraordinary. A friendship that would soon touch everyone's hearts and change the way they saw both women forever. The gentle conversation between Lila and Mrs. Cole continued as the party buzzed around them. The two sat at the small corner table, smiling and signing with their hands, as if they were in their own little world. The sounds of laughter, music, and clinking glasses faded into the background. For Mrs. Cole, the hall had always felt like a cage of noise. She could see everyone talking but never truly be part of it. But now, with Lila beside her, everything felt different. For the first time in years, she felt connected. Mrs. Cole's hands moved gracefully as she signed her thoughts, her eyes lighting up with each sentence. She told Lila about her childhood, how she had lost her hearing at the age of 3 due to a high fever. Back then, there were no special schools or teachers for deaf children, and her parents didn't know how to communicate with her. "I grew up surrounded by silence," she signed, her eyes soft and distant. "It was lonely. People loved me, but they didn't understand me." Lila listened closely, her eyes full of empathy. She nodded gently, signing, "That must have been hard. But you are so strong." Mrs. Cole smiled, touched by her kindness. "Strength comes from surviving silence," she signed. "Sometimes it hurts more than words can explain." Lila felt her heart twist. She couldn't imagine living in a world where you could see people's laughter but never hear it, where your words were trapped in your hands and often ignored. Yet here was Mrs. Cole, elegant, kind, and patient, still carrying warmth in her heart despite all the loneliness. After a moment, Mrs. Cole began signing something lighter. She told Lila funny stories from her youth, how she had once frightened a boy who tried to tease her by pretending not to hear him at all, and how she met her late husband, who learned sign language just to talk to her. "He wasn't very good at it," she signed with a grin, "but he tried every day. That's how I knew he truly loved me." Lila laughed softly, her eyes shining. "That's so sweet," she signed. "You were lucky to have someone like him." "Yes," Mrs. Cole replied with a smile that slowly turned sad. "He passed away 10 years ago. After that, everything became quiet again." The sadness in her face made Lila's throat tighten. She wanted to say something comforting, but Mrs. Cole quickly waved her hand as if brushing away the sorrow. She smiled again and signed, "But tonight I feel like he sent you to me." Lila blinked in surprise, her heart warming at the old woman's words. "Me? Why?" Mrs. Cole touched her hand and signed slowly, "Because you speak the language of kindness. That's rarer than words." The simple gesture made Lila's eyes well up with tears. She tried to blink them away and smiled, signing, "You're very kind too." I'm happy I met you. Meanwhile, across the hall, people were beginning to notice the scene. The billionaire's mother was smiling, really smiling, and laughing silently with a maid's daughter. Guests who had once ignored her were whispering among themselves. "Who is that girl?" one woman asked curiously. "I've never seen Mrs. Cole so happy before." Another guest replied, "I think she's one of the staff girls. It's strange. She's talking to her somehow." Even a few of the waiters paused to watch, smiling softly. They didn't understand sign language, but they could feel the warmth between the two women. It was pure, human, and beautiful, something that no amount of money or luxury could buy. Lila and Mrs. Cole were too deep in their conversation to notice the attention. Mrs. Cole asked Lila about her life, her family, and her dreams. Lila told her how her father had passed away when she was 13, how she and her mother worked hard to make ends meet, and how she dreamed of going to college to study communication. Mrs. Cole's eyes sparkled with admiration. "You're brave," she signed, "and smart. You will go far, Lila." Lila smiled shyly and shook her head. "We can't afford college," she signed quietly, "but I'll work hard and save money." Mrs. Cole looked thoughtful. She didn't say anything for a few seconds, then signed softly. Sometimes, help comes from unexpected places. Lila didn't quite understand what she meant, but she smiled politely. They continued talking, sharing more stories, laughing together, and forgetting that one of them was a billionaire's mother and the other a maid's daughter. For those few minutes, they were just two people, equal, connected, and genuinely happy. As the music changed, lights dimmed, and the host announced another toast, Mrs. Cole looked around and then back at Lila. "This is the best part of my evening," she signed. "Everyone talks to me with their mouths. You talk to me with your heart." Lila felt tears roll down her cheeks, but she quickly wiped them, smiling. "You make it easy," she signed back. And in that soft, golden light, while laughter echoed around them, a bond was formed. One that no one could see, but everyone would soon feel. The lonely woman who had lived in silence had found a voice again, and the young girl who came to serve food had found a purpose she didn't know she was meant for. Neither of them knew it yet, but this quiet friendship was about to change both their lives forever. The hall was still full of laughter, music, and the sound of clinking glasses, but something unusual began to catch people's attention. In the middle of all the glamour, the guests slowly noticed that the billionaire's mother, who was usually quiet and serious, was now smiling and moving her hands gracefully as if she were dancing without music. Some people turned to look, curious to see what had changed. Mrs. Eleanor Cole, who had always sat silently at events, was now laughing quietly, her face glowing with joy. Sitting beside her was the young maid's daughter, Lila, who seemed to be the reason behind that sudden happiness. At first, people thought their eyes were playing tricks. Mrs. Cole never interacted much with anyone at these parties. She was known to be polite but distant. But now, the sight of her smiling and signing rapidly with her hands was something completely new. Her expressions were full of life, her eyes shining like a child's. Lila sat across from her, matching her movements, her face warm and kind. They seemed to understand each other perfectly, even without a single word being spoken aloud. Guests began whispering among themselves. "Who is that girl?" one woman in a glittering gown asked. "Is she one of the guests?" Another man replied, "No, she's one of the helpers, I think. But look at Mrs. Cole. She hasn't looked this happy in years." A few even stopped dancing and turned their heads toward the corner where the two sat. Some smiled, others simply stared in surprise. The waiters too began to notice. One of them whispered, "That's the billionaire's mother. I've never seen her talk so much." Another waiter added softly, "It's like that girl brought her back to life." Mrs. Cole was too busy enjoying her conversation to notice the growing attention. For her, nothing else mattered in that moment. She asked Lila questions about her life, about her mother, about her dreams, and listened with genuine interest. Every time Lila signed something funny, Mrs. Cole's shoulders shook with silent laughter. She was no longer the quiet woman sitting alone in the shadows. She was shining brighter than all the chandeliers in the hall. As Lila continued signing, she didn't realize that dozens of eyes were now watching her. Some people smiled kindly, touched by the sight. Others, however, frowned, whispering judgments under their breath. "It looks inappropriate," one guest murmured. "A maid's daughter sitting with the billionaire's mother? How strange." Another added coldly, "Maybe she's trying to get attention." But Mrs. Cole didn't care about gossip. For the first time in many years, she felt heard. She could finally express herself freely, without struggling to read lips or pretend to understand what people were saying. Lila had given her a gift that no one else in that hall could: communication. Real, warm, and sincere. A few minutes later, the music changed and the host announced that Mr. Richard Cole, the billionaire himself, was about to give a short speech. The crowd cheered, turning their attention to the stage. Richard stood proudly, thanking everyone for coming. His words were powerful, his voice confident, but as he glanced around the room, something caught his eye. There, in the corner, he saw his mother smiling, really smiling, and moving her hands with excitement. For a second, he froze. He hadn't seen her look that joyful in years. Usually, at his parties, she just sat quietly, clapping when others did, smiling politely for photos. But tonight she looked alive. Richard felt a mix of surprise and curiosity. Who was the girl sitting beside her? He squinted slightly and realized it was one of the young helpers, Maria's daughter, Lila. He had seen her around the mansion a few times, always polite and hardworking, but he had never paid much attention. And now, she was sitting with his mother, laughing and talking with her in a way no one else ever had. When his speech ended and the applause echoed through the hall, Richard couldn't help glancing toward them again. His heart felt strangely warm. He remembered how his mother had always wanted him to learn sign language when he was younger, but he was too busy chasing business success. He told himself he didn't have time for it. Now, seeing her so happy with someone else, a small ache grew inside him. Meanwhile, the guests who had been gossiping earlier began to change their expressions. Some even smiled softly, realizing there was something deeply touching about the sight. The old woman, who had spent most of her life surrounded by wealth but starved of real connection, had finally found someone who truly listened to her heart. Mrs. Cole noticed her son looking toward her and smiled proudly. She waved her hand slightly, gesturing for him to wait a moment as she finished her sentence to Lila. Lila, seeing the billionaire's eyes on her, quickly stood up, embarrassed. She signed politely, "I should go. You must be busy." But Mrs. Cole gently held her hand, shaking her head. She signed back, "Stay. Please. You're not disturbing me. You're making me happy." Lila's heart melted. She sat back down, trying to hide her shy smile. Around them, the world continued moving. The music, the laughter, the flashing lights. But their small corner felt peaceful and pure. By now, nearly everyone had noticed the bond between them. Some whispered softly, some smiled knowingly, and others watched in silence. But one thing was clear. A simple act of kindness from a maid's daughter had done something extraordinary. It had broken the walls of silence around a lonely woman's heart and reminded everyone in that glittering hall that love and understanding were worth more than all the gold in the world. And though no one knew it yet, this quiet moment would soon change the course of the night, and even Richard's life, forever. Richard Cole stood on the stage, smiling proudly as people clapped for his speech. The room was filled with cheer, and every camera pointed toward him. But even as he thanked his guests and raised his glass, his mind kept drifting back to that one corner of the hall, where his mother was sitting with the maid's daughter. Something about that sight had touched him deeply. When the applause died down and the music started again, Richard quietly stepped down from the stage. His friends and business partners tried to stop him for conversation, but he nodded politely and walked away. His eyes stayed fixed on his mother. The closer he got, the clearer it became. His mother wasn't just smiling politely as she usually did. She was glowing with happiness, her hands moving gracefully as she communicated with Lila. Her expressions were lively, her laughter silent but full of life. Richard couldn't remember the last time he had seen her like that. He stopped a few steps away, watching quietly. Lila noticed him first. She froze for a second, unsure what to do. The billionaire himself was standing there, looking serious but curious. Mrs. Cole turned around slowly, and when she saw her son, her face lit up even more. She signed something to Lila, and Lila quickly interpreted it aloud. She says, Lila began nervously, "You gave a good speech." Richard smiled awkwardly, looking from Lila to his mother. "Tell her I'm glad she enjoyed it," he said. Lila signed his words carefully, and Mrs. Cole laughed softly, shaking her head. She signed something again, and Lila translated. "She says she didn't hear your speech, but she could see your confidence. She's proud of you." The words hit Richard harder than he expected. He stared at his mother for a moment, feeling a strange ache in his chest. He hadn't heard her say something so warm in years. He smiled and nodded, his throat tight. "Tell her." "Thank you," he whispered. Mrs. Cole's eyes sparkled with emotion as Lila translated his words. She reached out and touched her son's hand, signing something tenderly. Lila hesitated, her voice soft as she translated. "She says she wishes you would talk to her more often, even if it's through signs." Richard blinked, guilt washing over him. He looked at his mother, her loving eyes, her gentle smile, and realized how much he had taken her for granted. All these years, he had been so busy building his empire, running companies, attending meetings, and chasing success, that he had forgotten what truly mattered. He had always provided her with everything: luxury, comfort, and care, but not time, not connection. He swallowed hard and said softly, "I should have learned to talk to you properly, Mom." Lila signed his words quickly, and Mrs. Cole's eyes filled with tears. She signed something back, her hands moving slowly but firmly. "She says," Lila interpreted, "it's not too late, you can still learn." Richard smiled sadly. He knelt beside her chair, holding her hand gently. "I promise I will," he said. His mother squeezed his hand tightly, her eyes full of love. Lila stood quietly beside them, trying not to interrupt, but her heart felt full. Watching the bond between mother and son heal before her eyes brought tears to her own. She had only wanted to be kind, to help a lonely old woman feel seen. And yet, somehow, her small act had opened a door that had been locked for years. Mrs. Cole signed something again, and this time, she motioned for Lila to stay. Lila hesitated, but Richard smiled and said, "Please, sit. You've done something tonight that no one else could." Lila sat back down shyly, unsure how to respond. Richard looked at her with genuine gratitude. "My mother hasn't smiled like this in years," he said softly. "I can't thank you enough for that." Lila blushed, shaking her head. "You don't have to thank me, sir. I only did what anyone should do." Richard chuckled gently. "Maybe so, but no one else did." Mrs. Cole watched their exchange happily. She signed something with a playful grin, and Lila translated. "She says you should hire me as your mother's interpreter." Richard laughed out loud for the first time that evening. "Maybe I should," he said, smiling warmly at both women. As the three continued to talk, some through words, some through signs, the people around them began to notice again. But this time no one whispered, no one judged. The sight was too heartwarming. The powerful billionaire, kneeling beside his mother, holding her hand like a child. The maid's daughter sitting beside them, bridging the silence between two worlds. It was a picture of love, kindness, and understanding that spoke louder than any music in the hall. For the rest of the evening, Mrs. Cole didn't stop smiling. She told Richard stories through Lila, stories he had never heard before. About his childhood, his father, and the little moments that still made her heart warm. Richard listened quietly, feeling both joy and regret. He realized how many precious moments he had missed simply because he couldn't hear her voice. As the night came to an end, Richard looked at Lila and said sincerely, "You've done more tonight than you can imagine. You didn't just talk to my mother. You brought her back to life." Lila's eyes filled with emotion. She smiled softly and said, "She just needed someone to listen, sir." Richard nodded thoughtfully. "Yes," he said, "and maybe we all do." That night, as the music faded and guests began to leave, A silent promise was made in that corner of the grand hall. A promise from a son to his mother, that he would never let her feel alone again, and a quiet hope from a humble girl who had unknowingly changed their world forever. The party that had started as just another glamorous event had now turned into something beautiful and unforgettable. After the emotional moment between Richard, his mother, and Lila, the atmosphere in the room began to change completely. The noise and arrogance that once filled the hall slowly faded, replaced by warmth and curiosity. Everyone who had seen the scene of the billionaire's mother smiling and talking through sign language couldn't help but feel touched. Richard decided that his mother should not be left out anymore. He called one of the event organizers and told him to make some arrangements so that his mother could be more comfortable among the guests. Then he turned to Lila and said gently, "Would you mind staying for a while longer? My mother seems to enjoy your company very much." Lila smiled nervously. "Of course, sir. I'd be happy to stay," she said. Inside, she couldn't believe what was happening. Just a few hours ago, she was a maid's daughter helping serve food in a fancy party. And now, she was sitting beside the billionaire's mother, helping her communicate with everyone in the room. As the music played softly in the background, Richard guided his mother to the center of the room where some of his close friends were gathered. Normally, Mrs. Cole would have stayed in a corner, smiling politely without understanding anything. But this time, with Lila by her side, things were different. Lila stood close to her, ready to interpret every word into sign language. One of the guests, a famous businessman, greeted Mrs. Cole warmly. He spoke slowly and clearly, trying his best to be respectful. Lila translated his words through her hands, and Mrs. Cole's face brightened. She responded with graceful signs, and Lila quickly spoke her words out loud for everyone to hear. "She says she's happy to meet you and that she likes your tie," Lila said with a grin. The man laughed, pleasantly surprised, and soon others joined the conversation. Within minutes, the billionaire's mother became the center of attention, not because of her wealth or her son, but because of her beautiful personality that had been hidden for so long. People began asking Lila about how she learned sign language, and she told them her story, how her father, who was a teacher, had taught her when she was little. The crowd listened with genuine admiration. Some even asked her to teach them a few signs right there, laughing as they tried to copy her hand movements. The once formal and cold atmosphere turned into something warm, friendly, and full of life. Richard stood at a distance, watching with pride. For years, he had believed that his mother preferred to stay quiet, that she didn't enjoy social gatherings. But now he realized it wasn't that she didn't want to talk. It was that no one had ever tried to talk to her. He felt both joy and regret at the same time. At one point, Mrs. Cole signed something to her son, and Lila translated with a big smile. "She says you look too serious. You should smile more often." Everyone around laughed, and Richard couldn't help but smile. He leaned down to his mother and said softly, "Maybe I should. I have a good reason to now." Mrs. Cole patted his hand affectionately, and Lila's eyes sparkled as she watched them. Felt like witnessing the healing of a family, something rare and precious. As the night went on, Mrs. Cole told stories about Richard's childhood, things he hadn't heard in years. She talked about the time he tried to build a treehouse and fell, or how he used to sneak cookies from the kitchen. The guests laughed and listened, enchanted by her expressions and the way Lila brought her words to life. By now, even the waiters had stopped to watch. The billionaire's mother, once invisible at every party, was now glowing with happiness, and everyone could feel it. Near the end of the night, when the music slowed down and most guests began saying their goodbyes, Mrs. Cole reached for Lila's hands. Her eyes were shining with emotion. She signed slowly and gently, and Lila translated softly. She says, "Thank you for giving me my voice back." The words made Lila's eyes fill with tears. She smiled, trying not to cry, and said, "You never lost your voice, ma'am. You just needed someone to listen." Mrs. Cole's hands trembled as she pulled Lila into a gentle hug. The room went quiet. Even Richard felt his throat tighten as he watched his mother hugging the girl who had changed everything. It was a sight that no one there would ever forget. A powerful reminder that sometimes, kindness from a stranger can do what all the money in the world cannot. As Lila pulled away, Richard placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've done something extraordinary tonight," he said sincerely. "You didn't just make my mother smile. You gave her back a part of herself." Lila looked down, humbled. "She gave me something too," she said quietly. "She made me believe that even small kindness can mean something big." The night ended with warmth and love filling the air. The guests left with smiles, whispering about the beautiful moment they had witnessed. And in that grand hall, where laughter and joy echoed once again, one truth remained clear. Sometimes, miracles don't come from riches or fame, but from a simple gesture of understanding. The next morning, the golden sunlight filled the Cole mansion, spilling across the polished floors and bright rooms. But inside, something had changed forever. What had happened at the party the night before wasn't just a sweet moment. It was a turning point in the lives of everyone who had witnessed it, especially for Richard, his mother, and the maid's daughter, Lila. Richard woke up earlier than usual, his mind still replaying his mother's laughter and the way she had hugged Lila. For years, he had seen his mother as quiet and fragile, someone who preferred solitude. But now he understood. She was never quiet because she wanted to be. She was quiet because the world had stopped trying to listen. He went to his study, where he usually began his mornings reading business reports and emails. But today he pushed them aside and picked up a notepad instead. He wrote a list titled Things That Matter. The first thing he wrote was, learn sign language. The second, spend more time with mom. Downstairs, Maria, the maid, was cleaning the dining room when her daughter Lila entered, still sleepy but smiling softly. She couldn't stop thinking about last night. The laughter, the hugs, and the kindness in Mrs. Cole's eyes. She never thought a simple act of communication could touch so many hearts. A few minutes later, there was a knock on their small door near the back of the mansion. Maria opened it and gasped. It was Mr. Cole himself, standing there with a gentle smile and holding a bouquet of white flowers. "Good morning," he said warmly. "May I come in for a moment?" Maria quickly nodded, nervous and surprised. "Of course, sir. Please, come in." He stepped inside, his eyes kind but serious. "I wanted to thank both of you personally," he said. "What your daughter did last night meant the world to my mother, and to me." Lila blushed and looked down. "I just talked to her, sir," she said softly. Richard shook his head. "No, Lila, you didn't just talk, you listened. You reminded me of something I had forgotten." He paused for a moment, then looked at Maria. "And you should be proud of the daughter you've raised." Maria's eyes filled with tears. She had never seen her employer speak so humbly. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice trembling. Richard smiled and turned back to Lila. "My mother hasn't stopped talking about you. She wants to see you again. Actually, we both do. I'd like to offer you something." Lila's heart skipped. "Something?" she asked quietly. "Yes," Richard said. "You mentioned you were studying and working part-time to pay for college. I'd like to help with that. I want to sponsor your entire education. You have a gift, Lila. A rare heart that sees people for who they are, not what they seem." Lila stared at him in shock. "Sir, I can't accept." He interrupted gently. "Please, think of it not as a gift, but as gratitude, from a son who finally understood his mother." Maria put her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Lila hesitated, her voice trembling. "Thank you, sir. I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Richard said kindly. "That will be enough." Lila nodded slowly, tears glistening in her eyes. "Then yes." Later that day, Richard arranged a special lunch for his mother and Lila. This time, there were no fancy guests, no photographers, just the three of them sitting in the sunlit garden. Mrs. Cole beamed as she saw Lila again and began signing excitedly. Lila translated, laughing softly. "She says she's been practicing her signs since last night." Richard smiled proudly. "So have I," he said, raising his hands awkwardly and signing the word thank you. It wasn't perfect, but Mrs. Cole gasped with joy and clapped her hands together. She signed something quickly, and Lila grinned as she translated. She says, "You see? It's never too late to learn." Richard chuckled. She's right. It's never too late. They spent the afternoon talking, laughing, and learning signs together. For the first time in years, the mansion didn't feel cold and empty. It felt like a real home. The bond between mother and son grew stronger with every passing moment, and Lila became a part of their little family circle. A few weeks later, Richard hired a professional sign language teacher for himself and his staff, so that his mother could communicate freely with everyone around her. He even started including her in business meetings, where she gave advice through her interpreter, Lila, who now worked part-time as Mrs. Cole's assistant while studying at university. Mrs. Cole often told people proudly, signing with a bright smile, "This girl gave me back my voice." And every time she said it, Richard would add softly, "And she gave me back my mother." The story of that night quietly spread beyond the mansion. People who heard it were reminded that kindness doesn't need wealth or status. It just needs heart. In the end, Lila's simple act of compassion had done something no amount of money could ever do. It had built a bridge between silence and understanding, between loneliness and love. From that day forward, whenever guests came to the Cole mansion, they no longer saw Mrs. Cole as the quiet woman sitting in the corner. They saw her laughing, signing, and sharing stories, her eyes full of light. And beside her was always Lila, the maid's daughter who had turned a silent night into a miracle. And in that laughter, that connection, and that love, one truth remained. Sometimes the smallest kindness can echo louder than words and change lives forever.